Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sukhi Hotu, happy greetings to all the brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Thank you very much for joining us today. During this coronavirus pandemic, we are all facing all kinds of challenging times, difficulties, and this give rise to stress and distress. Basically, I'm using these two words to describe this physical suffering, stress, and the mental suffering, distress. So we are experiencing these two kinds of suffering from time to time. How can we deal with this? So what we can do is to cultivate mindfulness-based emotional composure. And that is today's topic, cultivating mindfulness-based emotional composure. Basically applying mindfulness techniques to learn how to relax the body, calm the mind, and compose our thinking so that we are able to come up with purposeful and helpful thoughts that can help us solve the problem, how we can compose our thinking. Right? So this is the important thing. The Buddha has been teaching us how to use our thinking to overcome a lot of problems and difficulties that we experience. So what problems and difficulties are we talking about? Well, the Buddha has been using this word dukkha. So let's take a look at the meaning of the word dukkha. Popularly, the word dukkha is commonly translated as suffering, and that's a reasonable word, but that paints a negative picture to a lot of people, thinking that, oh, suffering must be something very severe. But sometimes dukkha can refer to very simple forms of suffering, because there are so many different manifestations of suffering. We suffer in so many ways. For instance, we come across things that are unexpected, uncertain, so it creates some kind of insecurity. So we feel kind of insecure about things. And also, when things are not according to what we want, we feel dissatisfied. So there is dissatisfactoriness. And all these lead to some form of unhappiness. But what I'm going to focus on today is the last two, stress and distress. So when I say stress, I'm referring to this physical suffering that we experience. Stress is actually an internal autonomic biochemical chain reaction where the brain sends a message and releases a whole lot of hormones, causing the body to become all tensed. So we experience that first before we even experience distress. Whenever something happens out there that disturbs us, the body changes first, that is stress. And then the mind gets disturbed, that is distress. So this is what I mean when I say stress and distress. So what's happening out there? Well, day in and day out, we are facing the inevitable realities of modern life. Environmental activities constantly stimulate our sense organs, bombarding our attention system. Circumstances keep changing and becoming unpredictable, giving rise to uncertainties and insecurities. People around us, they impose their demands and expectations upon us, putting pressure on us to respond. Deadlines and schedules, they drain away our energy resources. And problems, obstacles, difficulties, they arise unexpectedly and hinder our planned activities and also disrupt our peace. So all these lead us to have this perception of threats and conflicts going on out there. So all these uncertainties and difficulties create this perception of threats and conflicts. And when we experience this perception of threat and conflict, what happens is there is a part of the brain called the amygdala. And when the amygdala is aroused, it actually triggers a chain reaction. So the amygdala is actually sensing perceptions, sensory perceptions. And the moment it senses something that is threatening to the organism, it triggers a chain reaction, releasing hormones in the body, causing this tension in the body we call fight or flight reaction. With the perception of threats and conflicts, emotion is aroused. When emotion is aroused, two things will happen. First, there is a physiological change in the body. This is the physical suffering we call stress. And then there is a disturbance of the mind, and this is the mental suffering we call distress. Let's take a look at the manifestation of this stress reaction in the body. We call this the fight or flight reaction. The brain sends a message to the glands, and the adrenal glands release two powerful stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. They flow into the bloodstream and get carried to the various organs in the body. And each organ reacts in its own unique ways. The heart beats faster, blood pressure rises, respiration deepens, intestinal movement is suspended, muscles become tensed, hair stand on end, pupils dilate, facial expression get distorted, and then we experience perspiration, trembling, and body temperature rising. And blood sugar level also rises, and the body's immune system is suspended. As you can see, all these are very unhealthy to the body. At this juncture, I would like to share with you a very profound lesson that I have learned from my teacher, the late Bhante Punnaji. He has done a lot of research into the original teachings of the Buddha, and he has very meticulously and precisely discerned what the Buddha meant when he used three different words to describe the mind. The mind is an activity, and the Buddha used three words to describe three parts of this mental experience we call the mind. The first word the Buddha used is vijnana, which Bhante calls the process of perception. This is the perception that arises when activities in the environment stimulate our sense organs, and we then become aware of what was perceived through the sense organs, when we are able to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. And the second word the Buddha used is mano, which Bhante calls the cognitive process. This gives rise to cognition and conception. Cognition is the identification of what was perceived through the sense organs by giving it a name or a label, calling it something. And this leads to conception. Conception is when we begin to conceive ideas about what we have just perceived and cognized. And conception also leads to our thinking. The third word the Buddha used is chitta, and Bhante called this the affective process, which leads to mood and temperament. Mood is the way we feel about what has happened, and temperament is our urge to react to it. And this reaction is the emotional reaction, tanha, which is commonly translated as craving. But tanha is more precisely translated by Bhante Punnaji as emotional reaction to feelings. So the way we feel about something, that is our mood, and the urge to react, that is our temperament. And at the same time, we also personalize this experience, leading to the notion of a self-centered existence. When we begin to think, oh, I am feeling this, I like this, I don't like that. So the I, me, or mine arises. That is why it leads to the self-centered notion of existence. So these are the three words that the Buddha used to describe the mind. Chitta is really the emotional mind, and mano is the thinking mind. Now let us take a look at some examples, very important examples to learn, where the Buddha used the word chitta to refer to our emotional arousal and emotional reactions, and then the Buddha used the word mano to refer to our thinking, our reasoning, and our decision making. I would like to draw your attention to this Chitta Sutra, where the Buddha pointed out, emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. Notice that the Buddha used the word chitta here. So he was referring to emotions. Commonly, this verse is often translated as mind dominates the world. So mind does not give clarity. If we understand this as the emotions, it gives great clarity. And this is one of the wonders of learning from Bhante Punnaji. So emotions control us if we are not careful, and it puts us under its spell. This is why we got to learn how to tame our emotions. And if we don't tame our emotions properly, then the Buddha also pointed out in the next statement here, self-affliction of mental suffering, from Dhammapada verse 42, where he stated, whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, one's ill-directed emotions inflict upon oneself a greater harm. So what the Buddha meant here is that if we don't learn to tame our emotions, it can get out of control. So no matter what other people are saying or doing to us, it is our own emotions getting out of control that bring us greater level of suffering. This ill-directed emotions, the Buddha was really referring to mental proliferation, where the mind begins to run away with all kinds of thoughts from imagination, from memory, and from expectation, putting us under the spell of emotional excitement. So unless we learn how to tame our emotions and compose our mind to respond, then we will become under the spell of emotions. Let us now listen to Bhante Punnaji explaining the first verse of the Dhammapada, where the Buddha used the word mano.
The first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is mano pubbangama dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There mano means that thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called chitta. Mano pubbangama means the thinking part comes first before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method.
So in the first verse of Dhammapada, the Buddha pointed out, cognition precedes all experiences. Cognition predominates and creates them. So it is our thinking that creates our reality. And then the Buddha went on further to say, with vicious thought, if one speaks or acts, pain follows, just as the carriage follows the animal. Here, the Buddha very wisely used the ox and the cart as a metaphor for suffering. If we carry vicious thoughts whenever we deal with people around us, then we are creating suffering. And the ox is pulling the cart, and the cart is heavy. So all this becomes great burden to the ox. So the Buddha very cleverly used the ox and the cart to refer to suffering. In the second verse of Dhammapada, the Buddha went on to say, cognition precedes all experiences, it predominates and creates them. With virtuous thought, if one speaks or acts, happiness follows, just as one's inseparable shadow. Here again, the Buddha very cleverly used the shadow to represent happiness, because the shadow is not a burden at all, and it follows us. So if we carry virtuous thoughts every time we speak or act, we are bringing about happiness, and that happiness follows us like our inseparable shadow. Let us now examine the process by which emotions are aroused and we begin to react to it. I call this the vicious cycle of emotions. Activities in the environment stimulate our sense organs, and then we begin to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Whatever we perceive through our sense organs, we begin to interpret what is going on. So we interpret our circumstances, what is happening. As I mentioned before, when we experience these unpredictable activities, we begin to perceive them as threats and conflicts. When the mind perceives anything with threat or conflict, emotion is aroused. When emotion is aroused, it triggers a reaction in the amygdala, which releases stress hormones flooding the body, causing bodily discomfort. This is the stress reaction. When we experience stress reaction, it disturbs the mind, and that leads to mental disturbance known as distress. This causes us to behave in emotional ways. Our habitual emotional reaction takes control, and then we begin to feel all kinds of emotional states and begin to react to it. So this is our emotional reaction. If at this point we don't learn to tame our emotional reaction, it gets out of control further. We begin to personalize whatever is going on and cling on to it, and it leads to feeding of emotions, causing mental proliferation. And if we don't stop this, eventually it can lead to depression. So we have to be very careful. It can also lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can even, in the worst case, it can even cause people to become suicidal because they cannot stop this mind from getting out of control. So when we experience this vicious cycle of emotions, we got to do something about it. What can we do about it? We can learn to change our perception of what is happening. So we got to learn how to cultivate good thoughts. Bandipunaji earlier mentioned that modern psychologists have also discovered this. So here is a quote from a famous psychologist from the past, William James, where he said, "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another," which means we have the opportunity or the choice to choose how we interpret our circumstances. If we interpret our circumstances in a negative manner and carry vicious thought, we are bringing suffering. And if we were to interpret our circumstances with wholesome thoughts, and we carry virtuous thoughts when we speak or act, we are bringing happiness into our lives. And another famous psychiatrist and neurologist, Viktor Frankl, said this: "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." So what did Viktor Frankl mean by that? Well, when things are happening out there, it stimulates our sense organs. So there is stimulus. And then we begin to think about it and we begin to react. So between this stimulus and our response to what's going on, there is a moment, that space. When Viktor Frankl said there is a space, he was referring to a moment in time when we can choose our thoughts. And in those choices lies our growth and our freedom. So we got to learn how to choose good thoughts. So how can we choose good thoughts when our emotions are being aroused? And this is where mindfulness comes in. With cultivating mindfulness, we become aware of changes in the body. So when something arouses our emotion, the brain releases these hormones and the body starts feeling tensed. We should become aware that our emotions are being aroused. And that is the moment where we must learn how to pause and relax. So I'm using a technique called the 3-step self-compassion. So this is how we can make use of this simple 3-step self-compassion. When something happens there, it arouses our emotion and we start to feel all tensed up. Pause, don't react, relax. Take a few deep breaths and then only compose your mind and think about how you can purposefully and in a wholesome way respond to the problem. Right? In this vicious cycle of emotions, it is our interpretation of circumstances as threat or conflict that leads to this vicious cycle of emotions. We got to do something about that. We got to learn how to change our interpretations so that we can tame our emotions. We cannot stop emotion. The only way we can stop emotion is to change the way we interpret what's going on. Then emotion will subside. So if we learn how to change our interpretations, and in every situation we begin to see the good in it, and we interpret it as perception of peace and harmony, and that can help us tame our emotion. Learn how to pause, relax, and think. When you pause, you allow time for emotional excitement and anxiety to calm down, and hormonal reactions to subside, and then relax. When you relax, take deep breath. It helps relax the body, compose the mind. Consciously compose the mind to respond. And when your body is adequately relaxed and your mind is adequately composed, then you can think purposefully, focus on wholesome and beneficial response to the problem. If you can do that, you can then change your interpretation from perception of threat and conflict to perception of peace and harmony. That is what modern cognitive psychologists are teaching us. Bhante Punnaji mentioned that modern psychology is also using the same method that the Buddha used, and that is the way we conceive our reality and the way we think about how to respond will create happiness or suffering. Now let's take a look at what Daniel Goleman has to say about this. And Daniel Goleman is also a psychologist who has written many books, especially around the theme of emotional intelligence.
Stress isn't really so much in the things that happen in your life. It's really in how we react to them. And we can do something about those reactions. There are 3 windows of opportunity when it comes to handling the stress in our lives. The first is to do something to change things for the better. You know, whatever's the cause of the stress, if you can change it, do it. The second is in how you see it, changing the way you perceive what's happening. Now, if we can't change the things that are happening to us, and we can't change how we see it, then we're left with a third opportunity, and that's handling the way our body and our mind react to these things. See, when the body is stressed, the emotional centers flood the body with stress hormones. And this makes it do things like shunt blood from the arms and the legs into the organs. It's a fight or flight response. It pumps up our blood pressure, speeds up our heartbeat. It steals energy, actually, from the immune system, it turns out, to get us ready for an emergency. It's what's called the fight or flight response. You've heard about that. Now, if that response gets triggered day after day, week after week, and month after month, over years, what happens is the biological system in our body that's most susceptible genetically, that's most reactive, is going to start to develop a stress-caused disease. You know, if you're a cardiovascular reactor, you're going to get high blood pressure. If you react in your gut, you're going to get problems there, and so on throughout the body. That's how stress over years and years leads to disease. It speeds up the process of coming down with the disease. So constant stress, it's like getting your amygdala stuck in high gear. Continual hijacks. We need to calm down. That's where relaxation comes in.
You have just heard from Daniel Goleman. By remaining calm and relaxed, we have 3 windows of opportunity to deal with our stressful situations. The first is, of course, to change our circumstances, and that would get rid of the problem. And that would be the ideal situation. But we are not always blessed with that. For example, the coronavirus pandemic. And the second option is for us to change how we interpret what is happening. And by changing the way we interpret what is happening with the perception of peace and harmony, we actually can cultivate some inner peace, calmness, and comfort in our lives. And of course, we can also change the way we respond to the situation, and that will help us take control of our lives. So these are the 3 windows of opportunity. Let us take a look at another powerful quote from Viktor Frankl, where he said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And this is very interesting because all of us have gone through this coronavirus pandemic and it is still happening. Can we change the situation? Of course not. Not a single person in this whole world can change what is happening with coronavirus pandemic. So during the first 3 months of lockdown, everybody had to stay at home. We were not allowed to go out, and that was very tough on a lot of people. People were getting all stressed and all tensed, agitated, unhappy, and so on. A lot of dukkha going on. But I changed the way I perceived what was going on. I know I couldn't change the situation, so I realized that for quite some years before that, my 2 daughters who are living with us, they have been very busy with their careers, so we didn't get a chance to really spend a great deal of time together. Only on weekends occasionally, and evenings we're all very tired. So during those 3 months, we spent all that time together at home. We were cooking, we were sharing, we were having fun, we were joking, we were watching the TV. Okay, we were even feeling anxious together, looking for news on coronavirus pandemic going on. So it was a time for bonding. So we actually changed the way we perceive the situation, that it is a great opportunity for us to be bonding. And of course, now that the lockdown is more or less lifted and many of us can return sort of to some form of normality, maybe not yet full, so we have to change the way we respond to the situation. The new normal. Whenever we go out, wear mask and keep social distancing. Right? And wash our hands frequently. And if you can't wash your hands enough, carry with you sanitizers and stay away from crowd. That is how we can change the way we respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Let us summarize how we can cultivate mindfulness-based emotional composure. First, we have to be mindfully aware of signs of emotional arousals, this fight or flight reaction. Realize that there is a space between stimulus and response, the opportunity to choose our thoughts with virtuous intentions. And we do this with pause, relax, and think. Examine how we interpret our circumstances, and mindfully interpret with peace and harmony. Realize that we have 3 windows of opportunity. Firstly, to change the circumstances. Secondly, to change the way we perceive our circumstances. And thirdly, to change the way we respond to our circumstances. With this virtuous cycle of composure, whenever things are happening around us, change the way we respond things so that we are able to perceive our circumstances with the perception of peace and harmony. This will help us gain control of our situation, where we can then remain emotionally composed and feeling comfortable. Then we are ready to respond. Purposeful, wholesome response by pause, relax, and think. A relaxed body, a composed mind will bring peace and happiness into our lives. Very simply put, the Buddha pointed out in one of the sutras, the Mangala Sutra, the Buddha said, when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, changing vicissitudes of life means everything is happening around us, changing, rising, falling, things are unexpected, problems arising. These are vicissitudes of life. So when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, if emotion can be stilled and remain undisturbed, free from grief, cleansed of defilements, and liberated from fear, this is the most supreme bliss. And with this, I end my presentation. I trust that you have benefited from this. I would like to close by expressing my deep gratitude to my teacher, the late Venerable Dr. Madawela Punaji Mahathera. He has taught me much. I have benefited tremendously from his teachings, from his guidance, and from his inspiration. May Bhante Punaji attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. And you may have questions. Please feel free to send in your questions right away, or if you have questions later, you can always drop me a line through my email or connect with me through Facebook. I have also included 2 links. One is the link to the presentation slides that you have just seen in this presentation. I have also included the link to this video. You may watch again later. Thank you very much. I wish you stay safe. May you be healthy, comfortable, peaceful, and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.